I know that your fund has been in existence for quite a long time, because we know these days it's easy to start a venture fund
Yeah.
and then not being able to raise the second and third funds. And you came into this field from the international perspective. So I've heard about your fund before, but our audience does not know you. Will you please tell our audience some basic facts about your fund, about yourself, about your team? Please take a couple of minutes to introduce yourself.
Yeah, for sure. Thank you so much for having me. So Mindset started in 2016. I've actually been doing VC for almost 12 years now, personally involved with the ecosystem. So I'm Brazilian. I'm now based in São Paulo, Brazil. I started my previous life, I was a management consulting, like a lot of us in this market, doing big, strategic and M&A for big corporates. And then started getting involved with entrepreneurship back in 2009, when I started doing some angel investments of my own, started mentoring some for Endeavor, for other big, local organizations, started teaching one of the main business schools here. And then I decided to leave my consulting career to dedicate myself fully to venture capital, and started my first fund at the end of 2011, to be the first seed fund in Brazil at that time, right? So the Brazilian ecosystem is pretty new. So you can imagine there were a couple or maybe 4 names at the time, like doing VC Series A, Series B, but no seed funds, only angels. So I started the first seed fund. It was a very good experience. After that, I was invited to become the CEO of a multi-corporate fund. That was the first fund completely dedicated to corporates in Brazil and to invest in local startups, and of course, not only make returns, but connect to their corporate strategy, right? So the main sponsor of the fund was Microsoft. Then we brought Qualcomm, we brought Monsanto, and then we brought other big Brazilian banks and telecom companies, etc. So I was the CEO there. And we realized over the time, by investing in Brazilian companies and relating to these corporates, the big need to actually look abroad, right? We in Brazil, I think we have a very narrow view in looking to Brazil, looking a little bit into Latin America, but most of the local investors, I'm not talking about the multinationals, of course, but the Brazilian corporates or even the family offices or even, executives, high net worth individuals, they still lack access to what's happening outside of Brazil, outside of Latin America. So we kind of realized there was a big opportunity, first of all, to provide this access to these investors. And on the other hand, we realized that most of the foreign entrepreneurs, and I mean US based or even Europe based, etc., also don't have a good visibility of what's happening in Brazil and Latin America, right? Now, I mean, the last 2 years are very good for us. So there's like a bunch of unicorns arising from Brazil, SoftBank with a big fund from Latin America, etc. But until then, I think the visibility of Latin America abroad is still very small, and it's a huge market, right? So that's what we try to do at Mindset, and that's why we spin out of that corporate fund in 2016 to start Mindset as a completely independent management company and fund, just to actually connect Brazil and Latin America to the foreign markets, right? So what we do today as our core thesis at Mindset, we raise money mainly from Brazilian investors. So the LPs go from corporates to family offices to high net worth individuals, etc. But we invest only outside of Brazil. And our scope for now is only the US and Israel. And then we try to help these foreign startups come and do business in Brazil, Latin America, right? So in one hand, I provide a kind of an access for the Brazilian investor to access Silicon Valley and Israel. And on the other hand, I help foreign entrepreneurs come expand to Brazil and Latin America. So that's kind of the value add of what we do. So as I mentioned, we started 2016. We are now finishing the raise of our third fund. So this fund will end between $50 and $60 million. It's the third one. We have already invested in 45 companies. I'm very proud to say that out of these 45, 1/4 of them already operate in Brazil. So we're very fortunate to actually be able to support these companies expanding here. We have companies that have like 80 people on the ground that we help them hire since the first one. And we have companies that only deal with like representation and resellers, etc. So,
more clarifying question. You support companies in the B2B segment. Is that true mostly?
You are correct. You are correct. So we only invest in
So,
B2B.
if you were to tell the aspiring entrepreneurs how to operate in that particular segment and what makes it really different from when they do B2C or any other models, like what would be the main, I would say, not mistakes, okay? Just tell them what to do in the B2B sector. If you were to say
Yeah,
like two.
yeah. I think the logic behind B2B and B2C is completely different, right? If you're building a B2C model, is mostly a matter of proving a big number of users that you have a good product, right? And building a brand. Like the branding side, the marketing side on the B2C is really, really key. On the B2B is less of importance, right? So that's funny because most of the times when we talk about our portfolio, and for someone that's not local or it's not on the venture ecosystem, they look at the company and say, yeah, but I don't recognize any names. And I say, does it actually matter? Because they're not building companies for you as an individual to recognize it. They are actually selling to other companies, right? So when you sell to other companies, I think it's really important to prove that you can add value to this client. And the added value could come from simplifying an internal process they have, could come from diminishing costs in any of its operations, could come in making them make more revenue or be more profitable, whatever. But if you don't have a very clear value proposition, it's going to be really, really hard to scale on the B2B side, right? And also what I think entrepreneurs have to always remember is that if you're selling B2B and you have a corporate on the other side buying your product, these buyers are normally comparing alternatives, right?
So, but when companies work with big corporations, say you are a startup and you want to, in this B2B segment, have a big corporation as your partner, how do they deal with that level of bureaucracy, navigate all this stuff, which does come with a big corporation? Is that something you help them with as an investor? Is that one of your specialties? When people say smart money, we all want to know what it is. Do you help your portfolio companies navigate those corporate?
Yeah, for sure. I think especially I think the most smart money that we have is helping them navigate corporate sales, especially on the B2B side. So we have a bunch of experience, especially on the sales side and on the fundraising side. So I'd say on the day-to-day basis, helping in sales and fundraising is mostly of what we do, how we spend our time with the entrepreneurs. And also, as I mentioned, helping them expand to Brazil and Latin America. There's a big part of our smart money there as well. But I agree that it's pretty challenging. Every time you sell to a big corporate, you need to set your expectations accordingly.
Some members of our audience are just in the beginning of the investment process and they want to be technology investors, but they do have the experience in building companies in other industries, and it's the first time they wanted to invest in tech companies. You as a professional investor know, like, it's not a straightforward process, and having money is not enough. It takes something else. So what will be your advice to beginning investors? Should they be all angels? Should they invest in venture funds? What are other ways for them to get into that field?
A very good question. So initially, I totally agree that it's not easy to do that. It could be pretty technical, right? And it's not enough of having money to invest, because there are a bunch of very specific things that relate to investing in other companies, especially tech-based startups. So my advice would be, especially when you're starting, invest with someone that knows what they're doing and then have some kind of experience. So you can either co-invest with more experienced angels, you can invest through like syndicates of investors, you can become LP in a fund that is going to invest, and by doing that you get close to the fund, you learn how they are doing, so from that onwards you can do it by yourself. But I think starting just by dropping your own capital in some startups that you think are relevant, I think it's really, really risky. Now, it's a risky business by design. I mean, You should have, you know, at least a minimal size of a portfolio to diminish your risk. You should know how to access the companies, how to do your diligence. So if you have no experience in that, I think it can be pretty challenging. So the best advice I have is try to leverage on top of others, right? Do that with someone that you know and trust and has some kind of track record in this market. And once you learn and feel comfortable, that's fine to do by yourself. But I think initially I wouldn't recommend anyone just jumping into the market, finding 2 or 3 startups and putting money there, because it's very hard to distinguish what's good and what's not.
Yeah. And you obviously have worked with many funds from other geographies. What would you say makes the funds outside Latin America different? And how are Brazilian entrepreneurs different? Or are they all the same? Could you point to some?
Sure, they are definitely not the same. So we've been working with like Brazilian/Latin entrepreneurs, American entrepreneurs a lot, because we invested in like 30 of those, I guess. And also we're very much into Israel as well, which is a very, very interesting ecosystem as well. And all of them are different and they have their particularities, I would say. So the interesting stuff of doing business, in our case, investing both in the US and Israel, I think there's one thing that it's not obvious and for us works very well. First of all, both of them speak English, right? So all the contracts that we do are in English, which is not obvious, right? If you're going to Israel, one could think we could do contracts in Hebrew or something like that, but we could do legally everything in English, which of course facilitates things. And second is the same currency. We can operate in Israel in US dollars. So that makes our operation easy because it's like one language, one FX rate, which is the basic stuff, I'd say. But also dealing with entrepreneurs is very different, right? So if you're dealing with an American entrepreneur, so there's a big culture of entrepreneurship in the US, right? Especially in some regions like the East and West Coast. So they know how to sell something. So normally what we see, American entrepreneurs are very good at sales, very good at scaling. So sometimes the technology isn't that good as you would think by them just pitching and saying, oh, this is really amazing, but it's not if you dig a little bit deeper. But they're so much good in selling that they can actually sell that as the best thing in the world. They can scale, they can become $1 billion company pretty easily without having such a deep technology behind it, right? The Israel is kind of the opposite. So they're really, really good in building technology. So sometimes there's amazing, amazing technology, but they have no idea how to sell it. And sometimes they're not concerned on how to sell it, right? So sometimes they develop a good technology just for the sake of developing a technology, and they don't even know how that will become a value add to someone that will buy that, right? So it's kind of the opposite. So it's kind of complementary in some way. So one is very good in producing tech, but not good in selling and scaling. The other one is not that much concerned about the deep tech, but also very good about scaling and becoming a very, very big company. So you have to shift your mindset every time you deal with one entrepreneur. So if I'm in Israel, I'm pretty much concerned how they're going to scale, how they're going to grow, how they're going to sell, how they're going to do marketing, etc. If I'm in the US, I'm concerned about the technology, what they have invented. Do they have IP protection? Have they do some research? Are there competitors? What's the barrier to entry, etc. Right? So you shift your mind every time you deal. And I think Latin or Brazilian entrepreneurs in general are getting to kind of the Silicon Valley mindset in the past 3-4 years. So they were pretty much regional people thinking just about Brazil. So once I heard from another investor a pretty wise thing, he told me that the main advantage of Brazil is also our main disadvantage, which is the market is too big, right? So in one hand, the advantage is you have a big market. That's good. The disadvantage is you have a big market. So sometimes people only think about the local market and forget to think abroad, right? So for many, many, many years, Brazilian entrepreneurs were thinking only about Brazil. So it wasn't like a world-class company. Like they all made in Brazil, only in Portuguese, only in reais, never thinking about expanding. So these will never build like really, really big companies. And now I think we came to a point that the local entrepreneurs realized that we are playing a global economy, and the world is flat and everyone is connected, etc. So it doesn't matter if you build a good company for Brazil, because you're actually competing to everyone else worldwide, because especially on the B2B side, right? The companies, the local corporations want to buy what's best, not what's local, right? So
Right.
actually they passed that point, and now I've seen more and more entrepreneurs building world-class companies with a world-class mindset. We are seeing now the first wave of Brazilian entrepreneurs starting their companies in the Bay Area, which is very, very cool. So we have a bunch of...
Without naming names, can you describe, like, give an example of a company that wants to do something in Silicon Valley, but it's originally from Brazil? Like, what will be the space?
Yeah, so there are some B2B companies and also some B2C, but there's one that's doing analytics and AI for companies using big data. That's pretty interesting. It's a Brazilian, very clever guy, entrepreneur based in the Bay Area, starting a company locally. There's another guy, it's also a funny story, an entrepreneur from the Northeast region of Brazil, built a startup, sold the startup, moved to the Bay Area, started a second one in the Bay Area to be world class. So
Wow.
we are starting to have these stories, and that starts happening, I think, due to the maturity of the ecosystem, right? We came to the wave of nobody cares about Brazil. Now we have the first unicorns. Now we came from 0 to 10 unicorns in like 3 years, which is amazing. Then now there's SoftBank investing in Brazil, so everybody wakes up and say, whoa, there's something there, right? Then we had the first $1 billion exit. Now we have Brazilian entrepreneurs going to the Bay Area. We have some Brazilian companies IPO in the US, which is also amazing, right? So I think Brazil came through a lot, but in the past, I would say 5 years, it actually changed a lot. But having said that, we're not investing in Brazil. So that's funny. We are seeing all this movement. It's getting very interesting. Lots of new VCs starting in Brazil, but they're actually completely focused abroad and try to help foreign companies take advantage of this maturity of the Brazilian market for technology.
Well, Daniel, that was very, very interesting. Unless you want to say something else, I think that our audience by now has a pretty good understanding what you and your fund are doing, will be doing, and good luck to you. And thank you so much for joining our online club. And hopefully we'll see each other in person sometime this year.
Yeah, for sure. When borders open again, I've never been so long without traveling. So I'm really hoping the borders open again. And just as a final message, so as I mentioned, we invest in the US and Israel, normally around Series A, B2B software companies, right? Especially in 5 segments. So we do fintech, we do SaaS, we do agriculture, we do cybersecurity and healthcare. So if any of you in your network knows about the companies, I'm really happy to take a look at them.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Daniel.
Thank you so much. It was a pleasure.
Bye.
Nice speaking to you. Bye-bye.